What if China had colonized the Americas? What if history had turned westward in an entirely different way? Picture a world where China, not Spain or other European powers, colonized the Americas. As we dive into this thought-provoking alternate history, we'll consider how events might have unfolded, from China's motivations and interactions with indigenous peoples to the ripple effects on global power dynamics today. Join us as we explore this fascinating what-if scenario and question how different human civilization might look if history had taken just one different path. To imagine this alternate history, we must first look at China's extraordinary capabilities during the Ming Dynasty in the 15th century. At the height of its power, the dynasty was a global leader in technology, military organization, and maritime exploration. Under the leadership of Admiral Zheng He, massive fleets ventured into the Indian Ocean, reaching as far as the eastern coast of Africa. But here's the big question. Why didn't they make it to the Americas? Historically, the Ming Empire turned inward, focusing on consolidating power at home and defending its borders. However, what if Zheng He's fleet had ventured east instead of west? What if China had pursued expansion across the Pacific? In envisioning this, we start with an alternate decision, a bold choice to cross the Pacific. This could have been motivated by the search for resources, thirst for prestige, or perhaps competition with other imagined seafaring civilizations. From just one decision, the entire course of history could have changed. If China had reached the Americas, their initial contact with indigenous peoples would have been a pivotal moment. Unlike the European colonizers, who often relied on conquest and direct exploitation, China's traditional imperial strategy favored building tributary relationships. These included trade, cultural exchange, and governance through a network of loyal local rulers. Could this have led to a more balanced and less destructive encounter? Perhaps indigenous societies would have been viewed as partners rather than conquests. One must also consider whether disease, the greatest silent weapon of European colonization, would have played as devastating a role. Would the relative isolation of Chinese traders, combined with quarantine practices rooted in Confucian principles of cleanliness, have reduced the catastrophic epidemics that wiped out millions of indigenous people? There's no guarantee of harmony, of course. Even a peaceful China would require resources and labor to sustain its newfound colonies. Still, the possibility of a less violent conquest opens the door to imagining a different form of colonization, one where collaboration might have outweighed destruction. When considering where the Chinese might have settled, geography becomes critical. The Pacific coastline, California, the Pacific Northwest, or Central America, could have offered ideal locations. Here, fertile land, access to rich natural resources, and proximity to indigenous trading hubs would likely have attracted Chinese explorers. From these settlements, trade networks could eventually expand across the continent. Imagine flourishing port cities blending Confucian architecture with indigenous styles, serving as hubs for cultures and ideas traveling back and forth across the Pacific. Once settled, how might China's colonial system have functioned? Unlike European powers, China historically valued a tributary system rather than directly controlling distant territories. This approach could have meant allowing native leaders to govern locally in exchange for allegiance and tribute, payment of resources like silver, food, or textiles. Confucian principles, which emphasize hierarchical harmony, education, and respect between rulers and subjects, might have provided a framework for administration. Would indigenous systems have adapted and even survived within this framework? There is potential here for a hybrid government system, merging Chinese bureaucracy with native political traditions. This contrasts sharply with the extractive systems enforced by Europe, where native populations were often reduced to laborers or worse. A Chinese-style approach might have shaped unique colonial societies with a greater degree of cultural preservation and cooperation. Another fascinating possibility lies in the exchange of ideas and technologies. From gunpowder and movable type printing to sophisticated agricultural techniques, China at this time held numerous technological advantages. These innovations might have spread quickly among indigenous societies, transforming their agriculture, communication, and military tactics. Similarly, Indigenous advances, such as advanced astronomical knowledge from the Maya or agricultural products like maize, potatoes, and cacao, would have enriched Chinese society upon their return to Asia. This hybridization of cultures could have birthed entirely new traditions, foods, and inventions. Of all factors, nothing so profoundly shifted the balance of power between Europeans and native populations as disease. Smallpox and other epidemics decimated indigenous societies, often before physical conquest even began. If China colonized the Americas, would this grim legacy repeat itself, or would outcomes differ? As a densely populated, internally connected society, China had already been home to many major epidemics. Chinese immunity to their own diseases might still have wreaked havoc on indigenous populations. However, differences in how China approached health, employing quarantine and other Confucian principles, invite speculation that the devastating scale of European-introduced pandemics might have been mitigated. If the Americas became part of China's maritime trade network, the global economy would also dramatically shift. Picture the wealth of the Americas, its precious metals, crops, and raw materials, flowing eastward via a Pacific-centric trade route rather than into Europe. Silver from the Americas, for instance, played a crucial role in China's economy in the real timeline. In this alternate history, direct Chinese access to these resources might have supercharged its economic dominance. At the same time, a Pacific trade route would have diminished the centrality of Europe in global trade systems, fundamentally altering global power dynamics. Now imagine the cultural impact on the Americas. Mandarin or other Chinese dialects might have become the lingua franca of these colonies, replacing Spanish or English in much of the hemisphere. What's more, Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism could have taken root in the Americas, intertwining with indigenous philosophies. Would indigenous animism and Confucian values, rooted in respect for family and nature, merge to form a wholly unique belief system? Could temples dedicated to Eastern philosophies have shared space with Mesoamerican pyramids? This cultural blending opens up avenues for imagining how religions, rituals, and philosophies from opposite sides of the Pacific could have reshaped spiritual identities and traditions across the Americas. Of course, China's colonization would not have gone uncontested. European powers like Spain, Portugal, and Britain would undoubtedly have taken issue with the Middle Kingdom establishing dominance over the Americas. The obvious question is, would they have tried to challenge China or avoid direct confrontation? Consider this. In a world where China takes the lead, Europe's imperial ambitions may have turned to less contested regions, such as Africa or Southeast Asia. Alternatively, Europe might have allied with competing indigenous nations to resist Chinese influence, leading to a fractured geopolitical landscape filled with multi-sided conflicts. Regardless of the exact outcome, China's presence in the Americas would have irrevocably altered Europe's expansionist strategies and likely stunted its rise as a global superpower. This alternate history poses intriguing questions about the world today. Could the United States even exist in its current form under Chinese rule? Likely not. Confucian governance and social systems are communal and hierarchical, vastly different from the individualist and capitalist foundations that define modern Western democracies. An independent, Confucian-inspired American society might place greater emphasis on harmony rather than competition, reshaping the nation's role on the global stage. By extension, the absence of Western-led industrialization and hegemony raises questions about which powers dominate in a China-centric global order. While this is all speculative, revisiting the past this way invites valuable lessons. It shows us how pivotal decisions, like whether a nation looks inward or outward, can define the course of history. For China, their inward turn during the Ming Dynasty largely isolated them from world affairs, allowing Europe to take the lead. But if a single decision had differed, the entire geopolitical landscape could have shifted. Even today, the rising influence of China in global affairs carries echoes of this past alternate world. Could we be entering a future where China exerts the type of cultural and economic dominance over nations that this scenario imagines? History, both real and imagined, underscores the importance of understanding the power of decision-making and foresight in geopolitics. Though this exploration is speculative, it's not merely entertainment. By imagining how the world might have looked if China had colonized the Americas, we challenge ourselves to think beyond inevitabilities in history. Decisions, technology, and geography all contribute to shaping the stories we inherit as truth. We invite you to reflect on these ideas. Could indigenous societies have survived longer under a Chinese system? Would Confucian principles create a different world order, perhaps more sustainable, or maybe more rigid? What would have become of Europe, Africa, and other areas marginalized in this imagined Pacific-centric world? Most importantly, how does reimagining the past help us rethink the choices and trajectories that will define the future? Let us know your thoughts, and let's keep the discussion going. History is not only about what was, it's also about what could be. Like and subscribe for more from History Twist.